Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gwendolyn Mason, and I am the Acting Associate Superintendent in the Office of Special Education. I would like to welcome you this afternoon to the Compensatory Recovery Services for Students with Disabilities presentation. As I begin this presentation, I first want to begin by thanking each and every one of you for the work that you do on a daily basis to support the needs of our students with disabilities. I also want to thank you for the work you did last spring when you began this discussion with many of your parents regarding the need to determine one's eligibility for compensatory recovery services. And then finally, I want to thank you for listening and adhering to the guidance that was given to temporarily hold off on those discussions this month because we knew that we wanted to provide you with this upgraded professional learning opportunity that will give you greater insight in terms of not only the definition and the eligibility criteria, but also the data collection tool processes. Our session will be recorded. We're going to make sure that during the session, there'll be a segment in which we'll answer 2 to 3 questions. But if you have other questions, there's a Q&A section that you're going to embed your questions, and we will make certain that you will receive a document later on that will provide an answer to each and every one of the questions that you have asked. I also want to reiterate that this is a Tier 1 session, which means that you will be paid at your per diem rate of pay as an MCPS employee. And then finally, I want to assure you that it is our hope that during this session that you will benefit from all of the information that we have shared that will enable you to continue to perform your duties and responsibilities effectively. We want to be a support to you here in the Office of Special Education, and we want you to know that while we will supply you with the resources and information that will be shared today, that we are always available via email or via phone call if you need any assistance. So thank you so very, very much for being a part of today's event. And now we're going to go to the next slide, recovery services. And so the definition of compensatory recovery services will be reviewed with you. We will also discuss the legal requirements for compensatory recovery services. We'll discuss the process for holding compensatory recovery service meetings and the process for how you analyze data to make those eligibility decisions. We'll also discuss how to enter the results of the CRS discussions into a new data tool. And finally, we'll talk about one of the key areas, and that is the coordination of compensatory recovery services. This afternoon, assisting me with this presentation are members from the Office of Special Education. They include Diana Wiles, and if you could go back to the previous slide, they will include Diana Wiles, the Resolution and Compliance Supervisor, as well as Julie Hall, the Director for Business, Fiscal, and Information Systems, Jonathan Langston, who serves as the Coordinator for Compensatory Recovery Services, Philip Lynch, who is the Director of the Department of Special Education Services, Brenda Brown, who is an assistant to me as the Associate, and also will be joined tonight by Cameron Goudarzian, who is also a tech expert, and he'll be talking about the tech tool this evening. All right, we're going to go to the very next slide, beginning with Diana Wiles sharing the legal foundations.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. Good evening. Next slide. What are CRS? Compensatory recovery services are an equitable remedy. That means the goal is to make the student whole. During the COVID-19 closures that caused school systems to transition to virtual learning for an extended period of time, it was inevitable that there would be a negative academic and or social emotional impact on students with disabilities. Because of that, school systems are tasked with having meetings to determine whether CRS services are necessary for those students. CRS must be provided outside of the regular school day. Next slide. Is there a legal requirement for CRS? The United States Department of Education has mandated that all states who were closed during COVID consider the impact of the closures on students with IEPs. You must determine whether CRS is needed upon the return of normal school operations. This is a requirement for each of the LEAs in the state of Maryland. Next slide. Who determines CRS? CRS determinations are made by the school team in collaboration with parents and guardians. The information from the parent and guardian is extremely important considering that they spent so much time with the student during the COVID closures. The question is whether or not the student requires the services and to what extent they require the services. The school team consists of the case manager, any related service provider that provides services typically to the student, counselors, transition support teachers, the student, if applicable, an administrator or designee, and if necessary, a central office representative and the MCPS attorney if the student is also represented by legal counsel. Next slide. In what venue can CRS decisions be made? We've identified two ways that teams can make these decisions. The first way is through a written agreement with Montgomery County Public Schools. This is a collaborative discussion with the case manager and all of the school-based team members, along with the parent. This can be done through a phone call, a virtual meeting, and an informal meeting with the parent, as long as you have received all of the data to make a decision and to have that discussion with the parent. You must document the decision on the prior written notice. The second option is to hold an IEP team meeting with all team members that would service the student typically, which would include any related service providers. Please note that if the parent in a collaborative discussion asks for an IEP meeting. Next slide. Factors to consider in the CRS process. Any student who was enrolled in pre-kindergarten through high school, including students who are enrolled in non-public schools, who attended MCPS during the COVID closures from March 16, 2020 through June 30th, 2021, are eligible for a discussion and determination of whether CRS is appropriate. Case managers must send the copy of the parent guardian CRS letter home to the parent, signed by the school principal in the family's native language. The parent guardian CRS letter has been updated, so please use the newer version that will be provided when all of the documents from this presentation are posted. For out of state or out of county moving students who have transferred to MCPS, please contact Mr. Jonathan Langston's office. He will assist the school team in obtaining information from the prior LEA and supporting the discussion with regard to CRS. Next slide. At this time, we're going to pause and we're going to take 3 questions. And as Dr. Mason said, any question that we don't get to will be responded to in writing at a later time.
So Diana, we have a couple of questions here related to your area. One is focusing on the need. We know that we need to provide compensatory recovery services for those students who may have also missed something in the transition area. Potentially our older students who may be working on a goal that is focused around a transition activity, job, or in the community. And somebody's asking about the legal liabilities associated with providing compensatory recovery services that are connected to one of those transition type activities.
Thank you, Phil. Excellent question. Transition services are a required part of the IEP for any student who is over the age of 14. So the need to discuss CRS is the same for transition services as they are for any other services that a student receives. So that would include academic services, speech and language, occupational therapy, physical therapy. If a student is of age to receive transition services, a team needs to consider whether or not they require compensatory recovery services in the area of transition. It's even more important for students who are transitioning out of high school. So you want to make sure that you include your transition coordinators in those discussions. You're looking at progress the students have made or the lack thereof during the period where schools were closed due to COVID.
Take one more question. We have somebody asking whether there's a need to go back and have this discussion again if a determination was already made for a student regarding eligibility for compensatory recovery services.
If you had this discussion or had an IEP meeting in the spring to discuss whether or not CRS was appropriate for a student at your school, you do not need to go back and have that discussion. There will, however, be steps that you need to take to document that decision that we will be discussing this evening. So please hold on for just a second until we get to that section. You'll be documenting, but you do not need to reschedule or have an additional meeting. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Brenda, who will talk to you about how to use data analysis to determine whether CRS is warranted.
Good afternoon, everyone. As we transition to the next slide, we will begin discussing some factors to consider in the CRS process. As school-based teams really begin to think about what they need to do, we're taking a look here at the key areas that will inform a school-based team's decision to find a student eligible for compensatory recovery services. We're looking for regression or an inability for that student to make progress, an inability to provide services or accommodations during virtual instruction, missing services, a delay in notifying the parent or guardian of a revision or modification to the IEP, or a delay in scheduling a meeting to address the parent or guardian's disagreement with the revisions or modifications to the IEP. Let's go to the next slide. So some additional factors to consider are the data points that need to be analyzed for all students. Report card grades, learning skill grades if they're applicable, progress on IEP goals, virtual service logs, our related service provider logs, any student work samples that you may have still, any informal observations, your teacher or service provider anecdotal notes, any Tier 3 intervention data, evidence of learning data is very important. It is very important in the determination of compensatory recovery services that case managers collaborate with general education teachers, ESOL teachers if necessary, related service providers, transition support teachers, counselors, school psychologists to analyze this range of data, academic data, social emotional data, to see if CRS is warranted. For transition skills, you are also looking at things such as independent living, employment readiness skills, financial literacy skills, and/or travel training. Cameron, if you could click on the parent guardian guiding questions. During the meeting, you will ask these questions to gather information from the parent or guardian. There are 5 questions, starting with the parent or guardian's understandings of their students' strengths, interests, and hobbies, information about how they felt their child is doing in English language arts or mathematics, social, emotional, behavioral skills, and progress in our related service areas of communication, fine motor or gross motor, and any additional information or work samples the parent would like to share. You will be gathering this information in the meeting. You do not need to send these questions prior to. If we could go back to the presentation. Thank you. Appendix C provides the framework for analyzing student data pre, during, and post-COVID, if applicable. And so you will see the guiding questions that you and your team need to go through to take a look at the data and make the decisions. If we could go back to the presentation, please. Thank you. And let's move on to the next slide. And so here are the data that we should be considering at the middle school level for literacy and mathematics. We're using that curricular-based data, the MAP-R, and the intervention data for Tier 3 reading interventions. And in math, we're taking a look at that, again, the evidence of learning data and the intervention data that students may have who participate in Math 180. Let's move on. Now taking a look at our high school data, again, we're looking at the progress checks, either English or the students are in ELD English, the common writing tasks, again, intervention data, and then we move over to math, the math progress checks, some CCR requirements for math, and any intervention data. We're going to move on to the next slide. We do have students who pursue alternate learning outcomes, and there is data available for this student group. In the fall of the previous school year, teachers of students pursuing ALO, alternate learning outcomes, completed a data tool that covered literacy, mathematics, and behavior. And additionally, there are the unique learning systems assessments. For level 1 in literacy, picture math. For levels 2 and 3, it was listening comprehension. With respect to writing, level 1 was the errorless writing assessment, and levels 2 and 3 was the writing probe. In grades 6 through 12, for mathematics, again, we had the ALO data tool. And for level 1, the number match assessment, level 2, the add and subtract assessment, and level 3, the multiply and divide assessment. Moving on to the next slide, we're going to talk about our partners, our related service providers who really support us in the instruction of our students. Again, they need to be fully involved in any CRS discussions prior to, if you are having a video conference between the parent, guardian, and the case manager, or definitely be involved in the IEP team meeting. Of all of our related service providers, speech and language pathologists are the only ones who might have to be able to individually conduct CRS discussions because there are students who receive speech and language services only. But in the majority of cases, they will be working along with the rest of the team. So when we think about our related service providers, including our transition support teachers, we should be looking at provider logs, quarterly progress on goals, any consultation with teachers, student work samples if you still have them, informal observations, notes about travel training, those kinds of things that will help the team to determine if CRS are warranted. If we could move forward. Specific to transition services, we're really looking at travel training, IEP goals implemented in the community, and on-site job opportunities. And so there are 3 areas. If the student can demonstrate those skills learned virtually upon return to in-person instruction, compensatory services are not warranted because there is no regression. If they cannot demonstrate the skills learned virtually upon their return to in-person instruction, compensatory services are warranted because there is a regression or lack of FAPE if services could not be provided during virtual instruction. And here is some guidance around graduating seniors with no opportunity. We are looking at compensatory services being warranted because there's a regression or a lack of FAPE. Let's move on to the next slide. In the follow-up documentation from this course, you will receive Performance Matters links in each subject area of English Language Arts and mathematics that will give you the ability to take a wide view of the different data points pre, during, and post school closures. Let's take a look at a current 10th grade student with a disability. This student had a goal in written language, as well as an expressive language goal about grammatically correct oral sentences. She did not, prior to the pandemic, nor does she right now, participate in any interventions. Just to place this student in a historical context, she would have been in 8th grade at the start of the pandemic in March 2020, 9th grade in 2021, and currently in 10th grade. So when we take a look at these first 4 grades, these are her pre-pandemic grades in English as an 8th grader. So she got a B in marking period 1, a D in marking period 2. She picked it up in marking period 3, but since we didn't have a marking period 4 grade, her overall grade for English was a B. Now taking a look at her grades for the 4 quarters of when she was in 9th grade in honors English 9, she had a C, an E, a D, a C, and a D, and then she ended up with semester 2, a C. So right there, you can see that there is a marked difference in this student's achievement in English from pre-pandemic to during the pandemic. And this last grade over here that you see as a D was her marking period 1 interim mark of a D, which then further lets you know that, this student may need some support because she's, slipped from a C down to a D. If we could move on to the next slide, please. Now we're going to take a look at the common tasks that she did. Now, again, we're going to go back to pre-pandemic. Here's what happened prior to the pandemic when she was an 8th grader, 100%. Remember, she slid down in 2nd semester for a bit, but then she made her way back up at the right prior to the pandemic. Here are the 2 common tasks that she did during the pandemic. You again see the impact of the instruction in the pandemic. If we move on to the next slide, going back to thinking about that student, I would, if I were part of the team, I would confidently be able to say that that student was negatively impacted during the pandemic and should be in the area of her goal, which is writing, considered for compensatory recovery services. This year, when we're starting with our meetings from now on, Appendix B is required. And if Cameron, you could click on Appendix B, please, and scroll down. So this is the tool on which you will document all of the data that you analyzed, as well as the discussion from the parents, and make your determinations as to whether or not a student is eligible for compensatory recovery services. If we could go back to the presentation, please. Thank you. So after you review the data in part 2 of Appendix B, the participants need to identify whether or not the student was negatively impacted by the pandemic. And if that is agreed to, parts 3 and parts 4 of Appendix B must be completed to identify the specific services that the student will receive. If after a review of the data, it is decided that there is no impact on the student, the team will only complete part 4 of Appendix B. But in both cases, whether the student is found eligible or ineligible for compensatory recovery services, the team must document the decision on a prior written notice. I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Mason to really dig deeper about identifying specific service hour determinations. Thank you very much, Brenda. Well, now you understand the legal foundations and the data analysis sections. But one of the critical questions that I find that many teams struggle with is how to make a determination in terms of the actual calculation of hours that a student might require in order to recoup or regain some of the learning loss experience as a result of the school closures. And I will tell you from my personal experience over many, many years, when I've engaged in those discussions during IEP meetings, many times parents may assume that compensatory recovery services means that their child is going to receive hour for hour, minute for minute, second per second, the total time that the student would have received if instruction had not been interrupted. And so the first thing for you to know is that you do not have to make the calculation based upon that specific hourly per hour, service for service as delineated on the IEP during the school closure segment. But here's some things that I want you to think about. You and I know that prior to the pandemic and the school closures, there were students who were receiving in-person learning every single day. But sometimes our students may have taken 4 months to begin to demonstrate competency or that they were making progress on a particular goal or objective. Sometimes it may have taken 5 months or 6 months. So I want you to begin to think about the students that you serve. Think about their rate of learning based upon your observations of them. And if you think about a student maybe taking 4 months to begin to grasp a particular concept where they begin to demonstrate some progress, then you might consider the fact that if it takes about 4 months, and if you offer a session, for example, on an hourly basis in a reading intervention or area of mathematics, it might mean that 16 sessions might be what you come up with as a recommendation to offer to compensate for that loss. Let's say again, it takes a student 5 months. Well, we know that's a 20-week period of time. It might take 20 sessions. It might take 25 sessions. It might take 30 or 40 sessions. Think about it in terms of the months that it typically has taken the students that you're serving to grasp certain concepts. But I will tell you this, that there will be instances where someone might feel that their child needs 100 sessions, 200 sessions, and that's a pretty large number of services. If you find yourself in that position and you need some support in addressing that parent's concerns, You can always contact your area special education supervisor, or you can also contact the office that Diana Wiles, who's the supervisor for the resolution and compliance unit, to be able to support your team with that discussion. I would say that that's an excessive number of hours. And with all of my years of experience, I have never experienced granting that large sum of hours. But I think the guidance that I've given you will help you to quantify what you consider to be appropriate in addressing the student's needs. If we can go to the next slide, please. One of the things that I wanted to share with you is this particular evidence of learning slide that was shared with our Board of Education in the month of September. The Office of Shared Accountability, in collaboration with the Office of Curriculum and Instruction, presented information to the board that shows where our students happen to be prior to the school closures and then after. So at the secondary level, at the middle school level, if you take a look at grade 8 in the area of literacy, and for our high school special educators and related service providers, take a look at grade 11, you'll see some interesting data points. Isn't it interesting that in grade 8, believe it or not, they showed a slight increase and not a decrease in the percentage of students who were scoring within the county's estimated level of demonstrating that they were meeting the measure. But if you take a look at grade 11, you see a slight decrease. And so it's important to note, however, that although this is an aggregate, you're going to be looking at your students on a case-by-case basis, and they may not fit this profile, but I wanted to give you the sense of what was shared with our Board of Education about the way our secondary students performed prior to and then a return to in-person learning. Let's go to the next slide, please. And the last slide that we'll look at is the area of mathematics. If you'll notice in grade 8, we can definitely see that there was certainly a decrease in their performance prior to the closure of schools, and certainly then upon the return to in-person learning. But if we take a look at grade 11, we see a slight increase. So the data is rather interesting as we look at our secondary students at both the middle school and the high school levels. But remember, this is an aggregate. And so you will again take the opportunity on an individualized basis to look at each and every one of your students to make a determination whether or not compensatory recovery services are warranted in the area of literacy and mathematics. Now we're going to go to the very next slide, where we have an opportunity to answer just a few of your questions in this area.
Dr. Mason, I don't see a lot of questions specific to the decision-making process. There was a question referencing alternate learning students working towards alternate learning outcomes, but Brenda addressed that. There are a number of questions about access to the materials and to the attendance. And so just so we can make sure folks are relieved about that, we will be sharing all of the information with you through the PDO email system at the closure of after the sessions, and we will be taking attendance through folks who are registered on PDO. That's how you'll receive credit for that. So other than that, I think that there are other questions in there that we will be getting to as we move forward with the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Julie Hall, Director for Special Ed in the Division of Business, Fiscal, and Information Systems. And I'm here to talk to you about data collection and accountability, which are common practices in the field of special education. CRS is no different. We began this data collection process last summer and acknowledge and thank all of those staff members who did enter this data into a previous Google form. Some staff members, unfortunately, were unable to enter that data when the Google form was closed. And we're going to address that as well today. Recently, the Maryland State Department of Education issued a memorandum defining the accountability and data requirements. So as a result, a more comprehensive data collection tool was necessary to accurately document the data and efforts of teams for each of our students with disabilities. Next slide. Thank you. So as part of that data collection tool design, the Office of Special Education pulled a data set directly from MOIAP. This data set included approximately 19,000 students that are preloaded into our data collection tool. From the previous data, we were able to document around 2,400 students who were identified as ineligible or the parents declined the CRS. So we need to move forward to collect specific data points around the remaining public school students. Although the final deadline is June 1st, we're required to submit quarterly reports to the state of Maryland to demonstrate our own progress on this data collection throughout this year. Everyone is going to need to enter data into the data tool for their current caseload. Some of you remember that the Google Sheet was closed by the end of the summer and they didn't enter that data, but the data and information should be in MOIAP. So accessing that information for your current caseload, you want to look at the prior written notices and other information that's within MOIAP. Similar to last time, we recognize that this is a task that takes time. So as mentioned earlier, we're giving an additional 8 hours per diem to work on this data entry. So now I'm going to turn it over to the team that created this data collection tool to kind of walk you through those steps one by one on how to enter that data.
Hi everyone, my name is Cameron. Today I'll be speaking to you about the steps of submitting a form. So I'm going to go ahead and start by showing you the steps of doing it, and then I'll reiterate those steps after showing you. So first and foremost, you're going to get a link to this form. Okay, the first step you're going to do is click Control F on your keyboard, and in the top right section, you'll see a pop-up. In this pop-up, you will type in your student's ID. So for an example, I made my student the ID 111111, and you'll see it pop up over here. So you'll see my student's ID, grade, school contact, and whether or not they need a Google form. So as you can see, there isn't a name there, and that's just to keep the student's information private. So I'm going to go down below, and you'll see over here that this student does not need a form. So for that, you'd leave them exempt. If you did think that the student needed to complete a form, just please contact me, Derek, or Tyler, and you'll see our information in the following slides. So I'm going to go back up here, and I'm going to click Google Form, and it's going to open up a form with the pre-populated information of my student. So as you can see, my student ID is there, my first name's there as test, and last name is test. I'm going to go back and reselect the grade. I'm going to click the school. Confirm that the school contact is the correct person. If not, feel free to change it. The school education program. And then I'm going to see whether or not the student is eligible for CRS. If they are, great. Click yes, and you're going to be prompted to the next page. If you click any of the answers below, whether it's no, CRS declined by family, or vacuum monetary settlement, you will be prompted with a submit form button, and you'll be done over there. So I'm going to click next over here after selecting yes. And you'll see I'm prompted to another page. This page is going to ask me who's providing the CRS. I'm going to say school-based staff member. Types of CRS provided. So these are a check that all apply questions. So I could just select all or none. So after that, you're going to get the section that asks you about the hours. So you'll see all the hours for different types of subjects, math, reading, writing, and so forth. If a student is planning on getting a certain amount of hours, we're going to write a numeric value in the plan section. So for an example, 10. If I'm writing a numeric value in the plan section, I must write a numeric value in the received section. So here it says NA, but we're going to replace that with a minimum of 0. This lets us know that a student will be receiving these hours, but they just have not received them yet. So in this example in the reading, let's say the student will not need any reading. We're going to select NA to just match the received section below it. So for the purpose of this, I'm just going to keep on going by typing in just a number because they're all required. So I'm going to go through all of these. You'll see all the different types of services provided. So as you can see, all of these services are provided by different people. In the event that a case manager cannot enter this information in, a service provider is able to go into that form, select the student, and then select their information, type their information in for their particular service provided. So as you can see here at the bottom, this last question is for case managers only. Please, case managers only answer this question. If they've completed all CRS, select yes. If no, it's a simple no. And then you can submit the form. The beauty of this form is that you're going to get an email sent to you that gives you a receipt of all the responses that you have sent. You can either edit your response right here, right after submitting it, or as you can see here, my inbox has now one email with the Google form. It shows me my students' information and all the answers I've just provided. And I can edit the response here. And look at all the information I just provided a minute ago. Again, this form was made for case managers, but if you are a service provider, you are able to go in and enter in just your hours for that particular student. And we will take care of all the information in the back end and we'll consolidate that information. So again, please don't hesitate to use it. It is a tool meant for all case managers and service providers. I recommend that case managers are the ones who take care of this. So now I'm going to go back and I'm just going to reiterate these few points. So you're going to locate the Google Sheet. We're going to give you a link. You're going to be asked to log in with your MCPS Gmail account. You're then going to have to Control F on your keyboard to populate that search bar in the Google Sheets. And then you're going to locate the student via their student ID. You're going to check the Google form column to see if the student needs to submit a Google form. If a new form is needed, that Google form hyperlink will be available, like I previously shown. You're going to just verify the pre-filled information and then add in your information and then submit the form. If a new form is not needed, the record will say no form needed in bold. And this means that the student is already accounted for. Again, if you think that a student needs to be accounted for, please don't hesitate to reach out to the contacts provided in the following slide. Lastly, step 4, once submitted, you'll receive an email to your MCPS Gmail account with your submission. If you need to make any changes, click on the edit response button shown in the email. So over here, just to reiterate a couple of things, this is a static sheet. So after you complete the Google form column is not going to update itself. And then when entering in hours, as I said previously, if a student is not receiving hours for a particular subject, please write NA in both the planned and received section for that field. And then on the other side, if a student is receiving or plans to receive hours for a particular subject, please write a numeric value for the planned and received section for that field. I'm going to pass it back over to Julie, who will speak about some important dates.
Thanks, Cameron. The following are important dates to remember as it relates to CRS data collection. Keep in mind there's due dates and deadlines, followed by a blackout period for our internal reconciliation and reporting to MSDE. The data is cumulative to the state, so by June 3rd, 2022, all data for all our special ed students must be completely entered. My office will be compiling that information and that data, even if there is multiple entries for a single student. Next slide. As in any tools, there's bound to be questions or concerns, errors possible. If a student information in the Google Sheet is incorrect, or if you think there's a student is missing that needs to be submitted, please contact our IT unit and OSE via email, and they'll be able to assist you. Next, we're going to look and check our Q&A document, see if there's any questions for this topic area.
So Julie and Cameron, I see a question asking for clarification about when the data collection tool should be completed. And they want to clarify that it should be completed after the conversation with the parent and the eligibility discussion. Is that correct?
In some cases, the conversation has already occurred. And in some cases, the compensatory recovery services may have occurred this summer, so you could enter it all at once. If you are about to have that conversation, you can enter in the information after that conversation, so you have that planned time, and then resubmit it once there is some completion hours.
Another question asked whether the form would need to be completed if the student was found to not be eligible for compensatory recovery services.
So when Cameron was demonstrating, you would fill in the first portion of the form and you would select no, not eligible, or the parent declined services. So that would be entered into the form.
Okay. It looks like those are the primary questions that are about the data collection process. Julie?
Okay, great. So at this time, Mr. Lynch, Director of the Department of Special Education, will take us through the next steps.
Thank you. Next slide. Now that we've discussed the process for considering eligibility and you've been introduced to the Compensatory Recovery Services data collection tool for documenting the eligibility discussion, the services, and the delivery method of those services, we're ready to summarize the steps that need to be followed to complete the process. You're going to start by scheduling the IEP meeting or the CRS parent discussion for those students who have not yet had that CRS eligibility determination. You're going to do that by taking the steps that you would typically take to schedule an IEP meeting or discussion with parents and guardians. You're going to use the CRS discussion script that's linked here to support the initial conversation with the parent. One reason it's important to rely on this discussion script is in part to ensure that we're providing parents with an opportunity to have this discussion in the context of an IEP meeting, if that is their preference. As you engage in the scheduling process, determine if there are any cases that may require the presence of a central office staff member so you can coordinate that support with your special education area or program supervisor. An example would be a meeting where you've already received input from a parent that an attorney or an advocate will be present and you feel that you need that support. Next slide. While scheduling the Compensatory Recovery Service meeting, be sure to communicate with all the necessary service providers, considering the need for an interpreter or the use of a language line if necessary. In preparation for the meeting, collaborate with all the other service providers and teachers to complete Appendix B for each student being considered. Conduct the meeting using the information documented in the Appendix B. And to be frank, if the Appendix B is completed well, that will really guide your conversation with the parents as long as you make sure to incorporate their input during that discussion. Make the eligibility determination in collaboration with the other service providers and with the input of the parent and guardian. You're going to complete the prior written notice form using the examples linked here in this presentation as a guide. Please make sure that all the key elements of the prior written notice are completed. This document is a record of this discussion that will be provided to the parents. Let's take a look now at one of the examples of the prior written notice so I can just talk through some of those key elements. On this first page, you'll see that you need to indicate the type of meeting by selecting the other or add and by adding that it is a CRS eligibility conversation. You're then going to describe the action being taken by documenting if the student was determined to be eligible for compensatory recovery services, and you're going to provide a brief summary of those services. Explain why this action is being taken by describing the data that was used to make the decision. And that's where that Appendix B information is really going to come into use. If you've done that form properly, you can simply place that data decision-making process right here in the prior written notice in order to convey that to the parents. You're then going to provide a detailed description of these services that are being offered. Under the description of the evaluation method, list the data measures that were reviewed. And then under other factors on the last page, you're going to describe the discussion that took place with the parents. And you're going to document any agreements or disagreements that were discussed. If the parent declines or rejects the team's offer, you're going to document that discussion as well as any other relevant information that may be shared during that conversation. You're then going to make sure to upload that Appendix B to the MOIEP student profile so that documentation will live in the MOIEP online system. If we go back to the slides. And move on to the next slide. Thank you. After the Compensatory Recovery Services meeting or discussion, you'll need to provide the parents with all the relevant documentation within 5 days. Those documents are primarily going to be that 5-day verification letter, a copy of that prior written notice. And remember, that is the way we communicate that key information and those decisions that were discussed at the table with parents. So make sure that that information is sent to the parent, along with that Appendix B, which should reflect the data collection process. After the determination, you'll need to use the CRS data collection tool that Cameron and Julie described to document the outcome of the eligibility decision and the services that are being recommended. I understand that there sounds like there's some redundancy here, but note that the prior written notice is really designed to be the communication to the parents, while the documentation in the CRS tool is our way to quickly document using that very user-friendly tool that has been developed by Julie's office to help make sure that we're collecting that data needed. And as Julie stated, or we stated early in the presentation, that we ensure that we're getting to every student. So you do need to make sure that you document whether the student was found eligible or ineligible so that we can ensure that every student has had the opportunity to have that consideration. The final step is very important, and that is to complete that data collection tool, not only because we need to report that data to the state, but that we want to make sure that we reach every student and every family to ensure that the students get what they need. At this time, we'll talk about cases that may come up or come across your conversations with parents, or cases that you may have already encountered where there may be a need to contact the resolution and compliance unit. So there may be examples of cases based on your discussions with parents where the case needs to be referred to RACU. One of those examples would be reimbursement for a private service. If a parent is requesting reimbursement for a service that they've already provided to their student, then you should make sure that the resolution compliance unit is aware of that case. Another case would be if a student is being recommended by the parent for an additional year of beyond the age that they turn 21. That type of case will be referred to the resolution compliance unit, as well as a case, and I think Gwen referenced this earlier, where a parent may be requesting something that you feel is really out of the scope what MCPS Compensatory Recovery Services can cover. The contact information for the resolution and compliance unit is there. Next slide. As Julie discussed, the MSDE has established a process for monitoring the progress that all local school systems are making with the eligibility considerations for compensatory recovery services and the delivery of those services. This is one of the many reasons why we want to make sure that this data collection tool is completed. The expectation is that those eligibility discussions will take place by no later than March 31st, which is the end of the third quarter. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, all of you will receive a copy of this recording, as well as a link to the presentation slides and links to all of the resources that are needed in order to complete this process. We'll be sending that out through our PDO email system for those of you who have registered for the courses. And those resources are listed here. So you will see those come your way after the presentations are completed. At this time, we'll take a few questions if anybody has them.
So there's one question that says, if we're combining CRS discussions with an annual review or reevaluation meeting, do we write two PWNs, one for the meeting and one for CRS?
I think that's a great question. You have the ability in the MOIP system to create a separate prior written notice form, as long as you make sure that you are documenting all of those key components of the prior written notice discussion. You can use one form, but you do have that template language and that information provided to you in the resources. So you can do that in one prior written notice form. But it may be clearer to start a second one for the compensatory recovery services discussion. But as long as you are including that language that is documented there and covering those key elements, then you should be covered. Diana, do you have any input on that piece?
Sure. Legally, there's no requirement to do 2 prior written notices. I would suggest from the compliance office to do 1. You have all of the space you need in Maryland Online to copy and paste if you need to use specific language to include any of the decisions made in the annual review. You could be having this discussion in a reevaluation determination meeting. So any type of meeting that you're having, you can have this discussion and you can document it in 1 prior written notice. You want to make sure that the parent receives it and that it is completed. It may be confusing for a parent to receive more than 1 prior written notice. So please, we would encourage you from RACU to do 1. If you have questions, if you're unsure as to how to organize the discussion in 1, please don't hesitate to contact RACU.
And that was a great question because it allowed us to emphasize something that I don't think we really delved into earlier, which is what Diana just mentioned, that you can and should be having these conversations in the context of meetings that may already be scheduled. You can add this discussion onto a previously scheduled meeting. So we want to reiterate that. Do you have any other key questions there for me, Julie?
There was a question that if CRS was discussion was occurred and an extension in the summer beyond the regular program that was occurring during the summer, like ESY, and the student did not attend the whole time, are these sessions being made up, or how is that handled?
I know Jonathan will be talking a little bit about the pathways for delivering these services. And I also know that he is going back and has looked at those students for whom the services were expected to be delivered in the summer. So I'll allow him to chime in on that. But he is engaged in a process where he's looking at what was completed for those students who had a recommendation for the delivery of services in the summer. Some of whom will need to be completed later, in large part because of the need for personnel to assist with all of the delivery of those services. So Jonathan, when you get into that, maybe you can make sure that you touch on that piece as well. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan, and so he can talk about the service coordination process.
Thanks, Phil. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see everybody today. My name is Jonathan Langsam, and I'm a content specialist out of the Department of Special Education. My main role here is to assist in the process of delivering our compensatory recovery services to all of our students. It is my pleasure to be here with you today and to review all of our options for service deliveries. We'll call them pathways to service deliveries, and then different options on how we can engage in those services. So the coordination of services, if we can go to the next slide, please. MCPS has created multiple pathways to provide CRS. So the multiple pathways include managing services on the school level. That would be the school team finding service providers at the school level to deliver services there. You can also do a request form, which I'll review in a little bit, to ask for CRS by appointment. That's the phrase we're using when you're asking our office to match students with providers, appropriate providers based on the student's needs. Another pathway is the George B. Thomas Saturday School. You would choose that option again if you're asking our office to match with providers. And I'll review more about what that looks like for the George B. Thomas Saturday School. And then we also have the high dosage tutoring and tutoring program that's being implemented in our schools that we can also use, sort of a co-coordination where we can count that as compensatory recovery services. We can go to the next slide, please. The first thing I want to manage is the school managed option that I first referenced. And again, I want to make sure it's clear, like school managed and CRS by appointment, we can manage students from pre-K all the way up through 12th grade. And also there's transition services that we've sort of lightly discussed and had some questions on. Again, the school managed option is when the school team is able to find providers on the school level to engage in the students that are eligible in the hours that are being identified. If you are school managed, provider, or we're going in that direction, there are lots of options on how we can deliver the service, and sort of in the way that we can organize those services. And I have them listed here. We have servicing students at their school before and after school. We have regional service centers that'll be opening in early December, where we can make an appointment to meet a student at one of our centers and provide services there. We have staff members that'll engage students at a public library when it makes sense for both parties. And we are also going to engage students in public spaces for community-based learning, social skills. A lot of those sort of social and interactive skills sometimes require small groups and other settings. And we can access these locations on weekends, school breaks, when it makes sense. So that's sort of the outline of how we would go through school managed. If we can go to the next slide, please. Then I mentioned and talked about requests for central office CRS. So that's a specific form you'll fill out saying, hey, we're having a hard time finding providers at the school level, which we completely understand and expect. And you're going to solicit our office through a form saying, please match this student with a provider in these areas. I don't have the form to show you here, but it's very similar to the form that Julie Hall's office also developed, where you'll get a breakdown, you'll enter a breakdown of the services for us to engage and match providers with. So the options for CRS by appointment is that match, where we match you with a provider. There is also the George B. Thomas Saturday School, which I'll review more in a minute, and then summer 2022 delivery. So we already have some families and staff sort of coming together, finding out about eligibility and saying, hey, you know, the school year is really hectic. We're all really busy. Are there going to be options available for next summer? And we are saying absolutely. And I'm very excited for the options that we're going to be building. I don't have all the structures in place and all the details. So before we share it with parents what those details are going to be, we want to have structures around them before we present them to parents. But we do want families to know that we will have options next summer if they think that's a more comfortable or a better setup. And if we can go to the next slide. So in the by appointment, again, you're going to either access a regional service center, a public area, or you're going to deliver services virtually. So when a student is matched with one of our providers, these are the options that the provider can engage in with the family. Again, scheduling time to meet with that family at the service center, identifying a public area, and also virtually. I know it's not going to be a very frequent option, but in some particular cases, families might prefer that, and the delivery of the service can be done with very high quality, I guess. I'm trying to think of a better way to say that, virtually, in which the student can gain in that platform. But we're also remembering that the reason we're providing CRS to many of our students is because the virtual platform wasn't what we needed it to be for their learning. I want to talk a little bit about, if we can go to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about the regional service center, the setup, how you would engage in it and make an appointment to use one of the centers. So we have 4 centers that we're opening, and we regionally place them throughout the county to help with access. We want to help our providers by having a location that might be close to where they live, and also for our clients, for our students and families. So they're strategically placed. We have Little Bennett Elementary School to handle the north part of our county. We have Rock Terrace School and Julius West Middle School to be kind of our centrally located regional centers. And then we have Eastern Middle School, which is on the other side of University Boulevard, to handle sort of that side of the county. And we are going to use the Rock Terrace School to be a comprehensive site where we can provide a higher level of service needs for our students that might have higher needs, maybe medically, for access, curriculum access, materials, space. The Rock Terrace School is an excellent location where we can engage students that have higher level of needs. So to access one of our regional centers, you know, the first thing you'll do as a provider is you're gonna connect with your family and kind of form a partnership with that family who you're providing CRS for. And within that partnership and discussion, you're going to discuss the regional service center as an option. The service centers will be open on weekends from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And if the family and the provider think it's a great option and we can agree upon a location, the provider will access that service center by accessing the calendar for that center and then identifying the day and time they want to block off to provide services. So it'll be pretty self-explanatory. You'll have access to a calendar. You'll see all the slots listed. You'll choose a slot and you'll enter the information as you need. When you're entering the information into the box, you're going to put the provider name, the student name and ID, and you're going to save it by choosing this event only, just to edit that one block. If you edit all events, it'll edit them all for the year. And we don't want you to do that. We want you just to focus on that one day and time slot. If we are reserving for multiple slots, which I do think we will be doing for students that are getting several sessions, you can go ahead and mark up the calendar for as much as you need until you have enough slots to provide for that student. From that point, we will have transportation available for students to access our service centers. To do that, there will be a specific form to fill out that you will fill out at least 10 days in advance of the transportation needed. And that'll be a form that goes right to the transportation office. It has a lot of the same information that we would ask for on a STAR form. And they've been very much a part of our planning and setup for this. And we're excited to be able to offer a door-to-door option for our regional service centers. We're not able to do that on the school level at this time. So it is nice that we can offer this on weekends. If we can go to the next slide, please. I want to review a little bit of the George B. Thomas Saturday School, the setup, the students that we might refer to this option and how it will play out. So the George B. Thomas Saturday School is appropriate for students K through 12. You can see it's a virtual only option. So again, we might not have a large group of students accessing this, but we will have some students that this is very appropriate for, and some parents and families that I think will like this option. Mainly, this option would be for students in the homeschool model, LAD, and Learning Center programs. The focus is on academics, and they can work in the subjects of reading, language arts, and mathematics in grades kindergarten through 8. And for our high school students, English and mathematics. And we can list the specific courses that a student might need in math and find a provider that can provide that level of service. You can see sort of the times and the dates. It's 8:30 to 11 on Saturdays, and it is a rolling admission. I love this option for our students and families when it's appropriate. A student can start when their services have been identified and they've been contacted at any point during the school year, and a student can stop when they're finished getting their hours at any point. So there's no official, like it has to be started on this day and it has to finish on this date. It's a rolling admission process. And we're very excited about that. We have a coordinator from the George B. Thomas Saturday School that is assisting us. So when we choose that option, when we're requesting for our support, they will get information automatically on their end, and they will begin to contact families and link them into the Saturday school program by providing the Zoom links and matching them with providers. If we could go to the next slide, please. So you see, we do have summer 2022 delivery for all of our grade levels, pre-K through 12th grade. Like I said, we're still in the building phase of this, creating structures, coming up with ideas. I think we have some really good, exciting ideas for next summer, but we don't want to yet sort of share particulars with our families until we've had an opportunity to, again, put structures around them and kind of know what they're going to be. So please hold off on at least some of that part of the discussion, but let families know that it is available for next summer. And if you want to call our office and discuss that, I can discuss it more with you guys individually if you'd like. If we can go to the next slide. I want to review transportation a little bit overall. You've heard me reference it throughout my slides. But I do want to talk about what is available at our secondary level. That would be for our middle and our high schools. So with 10 days notice, a school can request an activity bus to provide transportation after school during the week. This is not a door-to-door service. The request is going to go through the student's school and office. So instead of submitting a form to our office for that door-to-door service, you're going to go through your school's office and we're going to order an activity bus. And we're going to identify the days for that bus and the times, and the bus can pick up the students and take them back to, an area close in their community that makes sense for that student. If we can go to the next slide, please. So we do have an ability for folks to sign up to be providers. You see a big smile on my face because to be really successful at this, we're going to need a lot of providers and a lot of hands on deck. So I first want to say, I know how busy and overwhelmed everybody is. I don't want to not acknowledge that. I'm here to support you through all of this. I'm your teammate, and we can do this together. I don't want you to think if you sign up to be a provider that you would be alone in any part of the process. Our office is here to support you all along the way, troubleshoot with you, and make sure this is a very successful and positive experience for our students and our providers. If you want to be a provider at the school level, there's a specific school level CRS provider sign up. And if you'd like to be a provider with our office, where I will match you with a student as needed, there's a separate sign up form for that as well. These forms, along with other forms that have been referenced, are all going to be accessible when the course is finished and we're able to open up the Canvas link with all the resources to everybody. And that'll be very soon. I also want to point out that I'm going to be doing a provider get together. If you'd like to learn more about just the provider aspects of compensatory recovery services, I'd love to meet you. I'd love for you to join us at one of the sessions that I have listed here. We're going to have 2 next week and then 2 the following week. It would be my pleasure to meet with you guys, explain the different options, and hopefully get us all excited about some of our service delivery. I've put my email here. You can certainly email me anytime with any questions about CRS and any situation you guys might be in at your level. So at this time, this concludes my portion of the presentation. I didn't know if we wanted to go to some questions before we get to closing.
Yeah, we're going to throw a few questions at you, Jonathan. So one person is asking if an MCPS case manager becomes a service provider, do they receive their tier 1 wage, their rate of pay?
Yes, you do. And don't forget, so I'm glad that question was asked because I want folks to know that they're going to get their rate of pay. And for every hour of service that we provide, you will get an additional 30 minutes of pay for your planning.
Julie may want to jump in, or Cameron, on this next question, but it's asking how a case manager would know if a student received the recommended CRS services. And I believe that person is asking, if the service is going to be provided by somebody other than the school managed process where they are aware of the delivery. How would they know on the back end, that those services have been completed?
So that provider is going to be able to enter that data into that record. And we're going to be pulling reports at that quarterly time frame so that we have that data collection and providing updates to schools to the status of where we are.
And then you've answered some of the other questions here, Jonathan, regarding the link for folks to become a provider. So that will be shared with you as a part of the resources. And so you should be receiving all of that information along with all the other resources. So I think that those are some of the most relevant questions for the service pathways. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to turn it back over to Dr. Mason for our closing.
So very much to all of our participants this evening. It has been a joy for us to share this information with you. I want to reiterate that we want to support you through this process. We are available to you, and we want you to know that you can reach out to any of us with your questions. We want to thank you again for what you do for students with disabilities each and every day.